Villains. Every good story has one. Mine is the dungeon. The ruler of these dirty depths I will face to conquer another day, or, that is, if it doesn't fall apart beneath my feet. I've got one question for you. What's a dungeon crawler without a dungeon? This monstrosity. Sure, it was peddled together by the greatest game dev crew to ever exist, but right now, after exam season, it's hanging on by life support. The thin thread holding this whole thing together right now is procedural generation. If I could get that sorted, I wouldn't have to manually assemble the pieces which DJ made in order to create the dungeons, because that can get long. But now that I'm working on automating this dungeon generation, I can see why Vinny, who we initially assigned this task to, couldn't get the job done in the 3 days of the game jam. And so, we meet the villain of today's story, optimization. I've got a working script so far, after blanking for many hours, but I don't think that it works perfectly. For starters, let me explain what I did. So, I've made some prefabs of the room with triggers on each of the doors, usually 3 out of 4 directions. For the rest, I put colliders so that you don't escape into the blue void of despair. Then I've set a trigger on it so that you pass through it, and that should trigger the generation of the room next to it for seamless generation. And to prevent backtracking, those 2 triggers, the right door from the first room you were in and the left door from the second, both of those going to be deleted. So that should prevent you from generating another room when you go back to that same trigger from the new room. That's what's supposed to happen. But what do I get? See for yourself.
Yeah, by the way, this isn't me pausing. This thing is actually it's not paused. The optimization is clearly telling me that this potato cannot handle pixels. So yeah, I've got to fix that pronto.
Hopefully, all that I have to do is update my 4-year-old editor to something newer. At least something which doesn't keep me in the dark so long about underlying issues. I'd be pushing it if my GPU lacking laptop were to try to download the Unity 6 editor, so I guess the 2022 version will have to do. I finally did it. The dungeon, it's growing. It took a lot of trial and error, but it all eventually came down to how I was handling the prefabs. As long as I ensure that the changes I'm doing to the triggers, namely deleting them, only happens to the rooms I'm generating from the prefabs and not the prefabs themselves, I'm Gucci. To be fair, backtracking still isn't viable yet, unless if you want to see a 2D dungeon enter the 3rd dimension in real time. I came back to it at night and suddenly realized that I've been doing the wrong thing for months. The doors are in the cardinal directions, going clockwise, but how would you numerically get the opposite side then? If you thought, why don't you just do 3 minus the room order, then you'd be stupid. But then you'd also be me, because that's exactly what I thought. However, try it for yourself and you'll see that you're dead wrong. The real answer is to use something known as modulus. TLDR, it's the remainder operation when you divide by something. But by using that modulus, I can now use this formula to finally implement proper backtracking in my code and delete the right trigger. Does that fix all of my problems though? No. Bruh. I'm dumber than I thought. The main issue wasn't the code itself, but it was my assumption about how I did the cardinal directions for each door. Remember how I told you that for all of my rooms, 0 was north, 1 was east? That's true for every single room, but the first one I made. For some reason, I started it clockwise from the west, making west 0, north 1, etc, etc. To add to my stupidity, instead of passing in this value as the door direction parameter for my room generator function, I manually calculated the opposite door by hand and passed that into the function. The problem is that my code already finds the opposite door direction and deletes that door to prevent backtracking. When I combine both of those mistakes together, I end up deleting the wrong door and enabling the digital pancake that was my failed backtracking prevention scheme. even if it took me until 2 a.m. to figure that out. So, now finally, my villain for today, or at least this summer, has been defeated. Sorta. Remember how I said there's only 3 rooms I've got to choose so far? Well, none of them have a north door, which means that the dungeon will generate itself now, but in theory, it all goes south from here. That's not really that big of a deal, but I might as well use this as a chance to commission our talented artist to make some more sprites for me to work with. And so with that, I got one question for you. What's the longest period of time you've wasted on a stupid mistake? Do let me know it down in the comments below, and perhaps it might make me feel better about wasting essentially 3 months. Peace.